In this lesson, we're going to continue using trig to assist us in finding the missing part of triangles. However, we're going to kind of venture away from a right triangle trig, and we're going to look at something we like to call the law of sines. So the law of sines works in a couple scenarios, but first, the law of sines looks something like this. Little a, little b, and little c represent the sides of the triangle. And big A, big B, and big C represent the angles of the triangle. When we use this law of sines, our goal is to have enough information to choose two of these, and then we're going to use those two to solve. So you'll never use all three. Your goal is to pick two, and we'll practice that as we go through these notes. How do we know which two to use? Now, the situations that work for using the law of sines are when we have two angles in a triangle and any side. All right, our second situation where this works are if we have two sides and a non-included angle. All right, and we'll kind of discuss what those situations might look like. So first off, we're going to start with solving for a side. And here we have a triangle. Again, see our vertices are capital A, B, and C. Now, when you do your homework, all of these should already be labeled for you, but not a bad idea to practice how we do that. So here in the information, we're given two angles. So we're told that angle A is 32 degrees, so we can go ahead and mark that. This angle here is 32 degrees. And angle C is 105 degrees. And if we needed to find the third angle, the three angles in a triangle add up to 180. So if we end up needing angle B, we could fill that in if we needed to. All right, then we look at our sides. This is kind of situation number one up here. We have two angles in any side. So side A is 10. So side A is always the side that, so here's vertex A. Side A is always the side that doesn't touch this vertex, or we say it's opposite the angle. So side A is over here, and it is 10. Has a length of 10. All right, they would like us to find the length of C. So again, if we look at our triangle here, here is C, which means side C is here. So now we choose two. We know we don't have a right angle, which means to find these missing sides, we're going to look into using the law of sines. And we need to ask ourselves, what information do we have? So we know little a and big A. So we know that this is 10 over the sine of 32. We don't have any information for B, so I'm going to assume the other item here that we're going to use is our C information. We don't know C, that's what we're trying to find. But we do know angle C, which is 105 degrees. All right, so there's our choose two. We chose our A's and our C's. Now, this perfectly sets up what we like to call a proportion, which we have seen before. So to solve a proportion, we're going to cross multiply So in cross multiplying, we take the top of our first fraction and multiply it to the bottom of our second fraction. So that should be 10 times the sine of 105. We set it equal to our other cross product, which is c times the sine of 32. We have to do this because we can't always solve for variables when they are sitting in a fraction, so it's easiest to go ahead and get this written without fractions so that we can get c in this particular case by itself. So our final step should be to get c on its own, so the inverse of multiplying by the sine of 32 is to divide. And now we just need to know what 10 times the sine of 105 divided by the sine of 32. And just like we've been doing before, we'll just round to the nearest hundredth. Now, depending on what calculator you're using, remember if you're using Desmos, make sure you're in degrees. So if we go over here to the tools, we want to make sure it's degrees. I'm not sure if it changes back to radians every time you exit. So it's not a bad thing to check it if you haven't been using it recently. So we are in degrees. So now we're going to type in 10 times the sine of. So again, functions is where you find your trig. So we have the sine of 105. And we're going to divide that by the sine of 32. And we get 18.23. And that is the length of that side. So again, we don't have a right triangle. We have one of these two situations, in this case, two angles in any side. And we're able to use the law of sines to find our missing side. Again, if you'd like to pause the video at this point and try example 2, it's very similar, so that you have a chance to work it out before you see the answer, and then you can hit play and see if you have gotten it right. So feel free to do that right now. So I'm going to start by labeling my triangle. Again, we are given angle A, which is 45 degrees. So that's an angle. Also given angle C, which is 55 degrees. In this particular case, we're given side B, which is 10. So again, if this B is up here, side B is always the side opposite that angle that doesn't touch that vertex, which would be this side on the bottom. So we're being asked again to find length C. So when it comes to choosing 2, since we know we had to find length C, we know we're going to choose this one. However, we're given a mixed match of information. We're given A and we're given B. However, as I said before, if you know 2 angles in a triangle, you can always find the third. So since we are given B, we're going to want to use the fact that our triangle has 180 degrees to find out what big B is. So the 2 that we're going to use for this particular problem should be B over sine B and little c over sine C. So we're going to choose these 2. So let's go ahead and substitute in what we know. We know little b is 10. Let's go ahead and find big B. So knowing that the angles in a triangle add up to 180, to find side B, we're just going to subtract 45 and subtract 55, and that should give us our remaining angle, which I believe is 80 degrees. So that's going to go here. We're trying to find little c. And then we have sine of 55. After you've done your substitution step, there should only be one variable left. So this one's a little trickier because we're given pieces of several of our law signs. So we have to make sure we can find a whole set to set equal to the set where we're trying to solve. All right, so this gets us to our cross multiplying step. So we have 10 times the sine of 55 and c times the sine of 80 The inverse of multiplying by the sine of 80 is to divide. So I'm going to go to my calculator. We're going to take 10 times the sine of 55. And we're going to divide it by the sine of 80. We should get 8.32. All right, so that's kind of a scenarios that deal with when you have two angles in one side and you'll use it to find a missing side. So now let's look at our second scenario. What if we have two sides and what we like to deem a non-included angle? So here we have our triangle again. We're told that A is 115. So there's our big A, which means it's an angle. We're told that side A is 30. So that's the side opposite angle A. And that side C is 17. So first, let's look at what it means for something to be a non-included angle. Since I know this side here and this side here, the included angle would be the angle that's in between, which in this case is B. So I should be able to solve this using the law signs, assuming I'm given either angle A or C, because neither one of them is the angle that's included in between the two sides we know. So we have the information we need to use our law of sines. So let's go ahead and pull that up. Now in this particular one, we're going to be solving for an angle, so our steps will look a little different toward the end, but picking and choosing two should look the same. We're just going to fill in what we know. So we know big A and little a, so it's probably safe to say that we're going to be using this information here. So we know that little a is 30, and big A is 115. We're given little c, and we're asked to find big C. So I'm going to assume that means we're not using B in this particular case. We know that little c is 17. And we're trying to find big C. From this point on until the very end, our steps look very similar. So again, law of sines, the whole goal is to set up a proportion. And to solve a proportion, we're going to go ahead and cross multiply. So we should end up with 30 times sine of C equals 17 times the sine of 115. All right, to finish this out, however, we have two steps remaining, unlike when we're solving for a side. So first, we need to get C by itself, and to do so, we need to go ahead and move this 30. So the inverse of multiplying by 30 is to divide by 30. In doing so, what's left is the sine C. So something we talked about in the previous notes with right triangles is the fact that the inverse of a sine is that s, or sine to the -1, or an inverse of a trig function is that trig function to the -1. So we're going to apply that here. To get c completely by itself, we're going to take the whole thing and we're going to do the inverse sine. So what you type into your calculator should look something like this. So let's go ahead and type that in. I'm going to swap over to my Desmos. So we have the sine inverse of 17 times the sine of 115 divided by, oopsie. I'm going to try that again. We need the divided by part to be inside those parentheses. There we go. So sine inverse of 17 times the sine of 115 divided by 30. Now we are looking for an angle measure. Let me make sure I'm still in degrees. And we should get 30.90. All right. So again, if you wanted to pause, this next problem is just like that. So you wanted to get a chance to try to set it up before you find it. I'm going to fill in what I know. So we know this angle here is 30. We know that A is 10, which is this side over here because it's opposite of where vertex A is. This side is 7. So the angle we know is non-included. And our goal is to find the value of x. So we have the sine, oopsie. Let's put our law of sines in here. Oopsie, undone. We do know little a. And we're trying to find big A, which they have put an X in for. So if you want to swap it to X, you can. If you prefer to leave it as big A, it's okay. Then we know little b and big B. So our setup should look something like this in preparation for cross multiplying. After we cross multiply, we should get 10 times the sine of 30. Equals 7 times the sine of x. Remember, there's a two-step process when this is an angle, so we're going to divide by the 7 first. And then again, to find angles, we're going to use the sine inverse. So we're going to do the sine inverse of each side. I'm going to swap over to my calculator. All right, we're going to do the sine inverse of 10 times the sine of 30 divided by 7. And we should get 45.58. with our degrees. So now, as far as triangles are concerned, you can find angles and sides of a right triangle using your right triangle jig and SOHCAHTOA. And now we're starting to find the angles and sides of triangles that are not right. And this is called the law